Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Ketubot, Kuf Vav. Last week of Masechet Ketubot's learning is sponsored in honor of Aviva Adler's Siyum Hashas by the members of her Navi Chavura, Yomi, Naomi, Tova, Vivi, Chani, Shoshana, Mindy, and their spouses. Aviva, we wish you many more years of learning and good health, surrounded by all those who love you and continue to be inspired by you. We're looking forward to having Aviva at our Siyum, finishing her Siyum Hashas with us. So stay tuned for that. Whoever has a register, by the way, for the Siyum Hashas, it's a good reminder to, for the Siyum Ketubot, it's a good reminder to register. Today's stuff is also sponsored in honor of the marriage of Adina and Eric Hajej's son, Elon, Mazel Tov. And today's stuff is sponsored in honor of Noah, best wishes for an easy birth. Okay, a lot of good announcements today. So we're going to get started now. We're in the middle of a really interesting story of Rav Anan. Okay, I'll remind you of the details that we saw so far. Rav Anan was, again, we're actually at the end of the stories all about taking bribes. Someone tried to give him a gift of a basket of small fish. He said, why are you giving this to me? And the man said, well, I'm going to court in front of you. He said, no, you're not, I'm not going to judge you, and I'm not going to accept your gift. To which we had this aside, which we're going to come back to. We're going to have another aside based on this. He quoted him a verse from Sefer Melachim with Elisha, the Navi, where basically a man came, there was a drought, and a man came and he brought the Navi, lechem bikurim eschim lechem, seorim v'karmel b'tziklono, and he brought him this bread, the bikurim, and they said, what bikurim? Right? What's the connection of Elisha and bikurim? It wasn't in Jerusalem. Even if it was a Kohen, he'd have to eat it in Jerusalem. To which they said, it was anyone who brings a gift to Talmid Chacham, it's as if he brought bikurim, and therefore that's what this man said to Elisha, at least accept it as a gift. And that way, as if fulfilling my mitzvah of bikurim, of bringing the first fruits. So Rav Anan accepts the gift in the end. For that reason, he says, I really didn't want to accept it, but I did. In any case, the story moves on, and he basically sends him off to Rav Nachman with the following message. He says, listen, this person, I can't judge him because I'm disqualified. He didn't specify why he was disqualified, which is really a shame because the story goes sour all because of this one line. So he just says, I can't judge him because I'm disqualified. Now, what does Rav Nachman think? Rav Nachman says, this is the last line we read yesterday, the last line of Kuf Hamabet, because he sent this to me, he must be his relative. So he figures this is the relative of Rav Anan, who we're going to see later was clearly a big Talmid Chacham. Havakaim dina diyat mekame. So in the meantime, Rav Huna had a judgment of an orphan in front of him. Now we've been learning all along the Masechet that we're always supposed to favor the orphans to a sense of, he was about to judge them. It was their time. They should have been judged. Well, he starts thinking to himself the following. Hi aseh v'hai aseh. I have a mitzvah aseh on one hand to judge these orphans and treat the orphans properly. But I also have a mitzvah aseh of kavod Torah. Of basically, this is the relative of a Torah scholar. I should respect him and I should put him first. And I was thinking, it's like you're standing on the checkout line and some big rabbi comes behind you and the checkout, the cashier recognizes the rabbi and says, oh, I'm going to take that person first, right? So that's exactly what's going on here. He says, it's not appropriate that it wasn't even the Talmid Chacham, it was his relative. Talmid Chacham's relative should have to wait. So I'm going to take him first. So, first he's deliberating, and then he says, Aseh techvod Torah adif. Okay, respect for the Torah is greater than dealing with these orphans. By itself should be a question, I'm not so sure. But that's what he says. And therefore, forgetting about the fact that he was totally wrong, it wasn't even Rav Anan's relative, right? He totally misunderstood the situation. So he pushes off the judgment of these orphans, makes them wait, and he first deals with the judgment of this guy. Now, that would have been bad enough, but it gets worse. Now, the guy who was standing against this guy, this unnamed person, right? I don't think he had a name. No, it was just a guy. So he had someone who he was in a conflict with, which is why he went to court. Now, what's happening in the court? His his counterpart, the person he's standing up against, sees what happened. He sees the guy walk into court. He sees Rav Nachman decide to take him over the orphans, and he figures, right? He sees the yakara de ka'avidle. He sees all the respect this guy is getting, and he gets really scared. He said, "This must be some big guy I'm up against in court." Istatem ta'anate, and he basically becomes speechless. He can't. He fumbles. He can't make any claims for himself, and he obviously loses in court because he couldn't open his mouth. Right? This is, I'm sure lawyers know that, right? It's like fear tactics that the lawyers, you bring someone very important, all of a sudden it gets everybody else scared, and then they shut up and they have nothing to say. So now, here's the perversion of justice that happened. Number one, the orphans got pushed to the side. Number two, this other guy couldn't even make a claim, in which case the guy immediately won his case. And, end of deal. And look how much justice was perverted, all because he wanted to give a gift to Rav Anan. Rav Anan wouldn't even accept it. In the end, he does for other reasons, but Rav Anan sends him off, and Rav Anan really is the one at fault because he didn't specify why he couldn't judge him. So now, and yes, I agree with you, Becky, that Rav Nachman is also to blame a little bit, right? Because he jumped to all sorts of conclusions, acted upon them without thinking about what are the ramifications of what I'm doing. You're right, that Rav Nachman is also at fault. The Gemara blames Rav Anan exclusively, even though I agree with you. Rav Anan have a ragil Eliahu HaNavi. Happened to be that Rav Anan was a big gadol, and Eliahu HaNavi often came to meet him. Seder de Eliyahu. You might have heard of this book, you might not have. There's a book of Midrash called Seder Eliyahu Raba and Seder Eliyahu Zuta. We're now going to learn why there are two of them, and one is called Raba, which means the great Seder Eliyahu, and one is called Zuta, which is the small, right? One is big, one is small, or great, or less important. So today we're going to see it's less important, but more like big and small. So basically, Rav Anan was the person who Eliahu HaNavi would visit and basically taught this book, Seder Eliyahu, to him. Kevan de Avid Hachi istalek. But as soon as this story happened, he stopped coming to Rav Anan. Yativ b'ta'anita. So Rav Anan sat and fasted to do repentance. Subaya rachame, and then he asked for rachamim from God. Va'ata. And then Eliyahu came back. He ata, but when he came back, have a mavit lebiute, he would scare Rav Anan, like he came back as some scary creature or something. We don't know exactly, but somehow Rav Anan was very scared of Eliyahu. Okay, Eliyahu scared him. So what did he do? Avid tebuta, he made a little box. So he basically would sit before Eliyahu in this box to protect him because he was scared of Eliyahu until he finished all of the Seder that he was teaching him. And this is where we get Seder Eliyahu Raba and Seder Eliyahu Zuta. Because Seder Eliyahu Raba was the parts that Rav Anan was taught by Eliyahu before this whole story happened. And Seder Eliyahu Zuta was what he was taught while he sat in his box and scared of Eliyahu, and that's Seder Eliyahu Zuta. It's obviously a tradition about it, right? I don't think we need to understand this all literally. But anyway, showing how important it is to repent after doing something like this. When there's perversion of justice, it's very difficult to repent because you've done something that's really can't be turned around anymore. And then you have to live with it, the fact that you've perverted justice. And anyway, a lot to be said for that. We're going to move on. Since we mentioned this pasuk about Elisha, we're now going to go back to that pasuk about Elisha. So we're on a tangent from a tangent, right? Like in the middle of the story, they had this aside, and now we're going to go off on that. In the time of Rabbi Yosef, there was a famine. God was Ritcha's anger. There was an anger of God. It didn't bring rain. Amrei Rabbanan le Rabbi Yosef. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Yosef, "Libai marachame." Please, right? Let's go back to Masechet Ta'anit. They always did. There was no rain. They asked, "Please beg for mercy." Amar Louis says, "I'm not begging for mercy because I'm going to take example from Elisha." Elisha, when the rabbis would leave the Beit Midrash from learning with him, and there were 2,200 of them, and as the commentaries explain, the important part here is that they ate at his table. Okay, so he basically supported 2,200 people. Now imagine supporting 2,200 people in the time of a drought when there's no food. It's pretty miserable. And yet There was a time where there was a famine, a drought, and he didn't ask for mercy from God. So I'm going to. And Elisha had all this responsibility on him, and yet he didn't ask for rachamim. Who am I to say I can ask God to bring rain? Right. So again, this goes against what we saw in tannaitic that all these rabbis did pray for rain. He didn't feel it was appropriate. Now we want to know where they get to this number 2,200. It says in the psukim. Okay, so we saw this pasuk already yesterday, but we'll read it again. Ish ba mibal shalisha. Person came from this place, and he brought to the Navi, which is Elisha, lechem bikurim esrim lechem sorim, v'karmel b'tziklono v'yomer tein la'am v'yochelu. Okay, we're going to see from here they get esrim lechem is 20, the sorim v'karmel is another 2. I think they get it from the word sorim and karmel. They're going to get to 22 loaves of bread. Okay, so we brought him 22 loaves of bread. V'yomer mesharto ma etein zel lifnei mea ish. His servant says to him, what, I'm going to put these 22 loaves for 100 people? No way is that going to be enough for them. Vayomer tein la'am v'yochelu. So Elisha says, give to the people and they'll eat. Because God said they will eat and there will be enough. And a miracle will happen. In fact, a miracle happens and it's enough for all of them. Now think about the numbers. Okay, there's going to be a problem here. The Gemara is going to say this, but I'll just already explain the problem. 22 loaves in front of 100 people doesn't sound too bad. Right? And the Gemara is going to say, particularly in the time of a famine. So that's how we're going to get to this mathematics. So Vayomer Misharto Ma'atein Zel Lifnei Mea Ish, right? So the Misharet says, I can't give this in front of 100 people. I'm back in the Gemara now. My Lifnei Mea Ish. What does it mean before 100 people? Ilema Dekulu Lifnei Mea Ish. He was putting all 22 loaves in front of 100 people. B'shnei Batzore Tuvavu. That's a lot in a time of a drought. Every 5 people split, right? Or even less, but let's say 22 loaves by 100 people, right? Because 20 loaves, 5 people a loaf. Plenty. Ella de kocha v'chad kamei mea ish. It was that each loaf went before 100 people. It was 1 loaf to 100 people. Do the math. There's 22 loaves times 100, 2,200. Okay, 2,200. So basically, that's how we get that he had 2,200 students. And also that he was feeding. And then we see he wasn't willing to pray, okay, even though a miracle happened, but he wasn't willing to pray and ask God. And that's where Rav Yosef says, I'm not going to. Now, talk about tangents. So we got off on this because we're on that pasuk from Elisha. Now we're going to get off on, well, Elisha had 2,200 students. Let's see what other numbers of students different rabbis had. And we're now going to move from Elisha much earlier on in the time of the prophets, now to the time of the Amoraim, and we're going to go through the generations, and we're going to see what we've seen in general. They talk about Yiridat HaDorot and how the generations get less and less, and got less in importance. So we're going to see the number of students gets lower and lower in each generation. When the students would leave the Beit Midrash of Rav, this phrase seems to mean when they would leave the Beit Midrash and then go eat with him. It was this concept of the rabbis. I don't know how they supported all these people, but that's maybe there were communal funds for this. But in any case, they would feed these rabbis. So how many did he have? Just like Elisha, 2,200. Rav was first generation in Amora. Bibe Rav Huna, who was a student of Rav, this could be second generation. There were 800 rabbis. And it was said about Rav Huna because he had so many students, even though it wasn't as many as Rav, apparently he had this reputation. Rav Huna have a darish b'tleisar and morai. He had 13 translators. So, sorry, you're right. Alpha umatan Rav Anan, my mistake. 1,200. I'm sorry. Rav had 1,200 and Rav Huna had 800. I read it wrong. So now, thank you for correcting me. Rav Huna had 13 translators. Translators are really microphones, okay? He would tell the Shiur, and they would then tell it to more people. So you see, he had a ton of students, have 13 different people dispersing his Torah. This is what they would say when they would get up and leave the Beit Midrash, and they would shake out their cloaks. Have a salik avka. Okay, imagine so many people shaking off the dust off their cloaks. The kasele liyoma, and basically the dust would go up and cover the sun. Okay, so you would you would notice it in the world, basically. It would have this huge effect because every little bit of dust collected with a ton of people together would basically be enough to cover the sun. Obviously, this is an exaggerated story. It's trying to show how many students he had. But Amre b'ma'arava, and not only that, but they say in Israel, this was because they knew this, this was told about Rav Huna, so they would say the following. When they would see it would be dark all of a sudden, and they would say, it must be Rav Huna was finished with his shear, and now that's why it's so dark here. Okay, so that was the word around town, right? It even got to Israel, his reputation, that he had so many students. Okay, when the rabbis would leave Raba and Rabbi Yosef's Beit Midrash, they were only 400 rabbis. Okay, so we've gone down from 2,200 in the time of Elisha, 1,200 of Rav, 800 Rav Huna, 400 Rav of Rav Yosef. Karulin of Shayu Yatme, they called themselves orphans. Okay, this orphan keeps coming up all throughout our Masechet. And we're orphans because look, we only have 400 students. When the rabbis would leave Abaye's Beit Midrash, Rav Papa, some said it was Rav Papa, already a fourth generation. Some people say it was Rav Ashi's Beit Midrash, which is already sixth generation. There were only 200 rabbis. The Karan of Shayu, Yatme Diyatme. They called themselves the orphans of the orphans, okay, because they were even worse. Now we're back to something else. We're back to our topic, but we're also a little bit off topic. We talked about yesterday that the Dayanei Gzerot, this is how we got to the whole thing, the Dayanei Gzerot got their salary from the trumat halishka. Now we're going to talk about other salaries that were paid from the trumat halishka. So remember, the trumat halishka was given machatzira shekel, the half shekel, everybody gave a half shekel. That really was going for the communal offerings, but anything that was associated with the communal offerings also was paid for from the trumat halishka. Dayanei Gzerot is already a little bit off, right? It's not exactly directly linked to the korbanot. We're going to have today a whole discussion of what was paid from the trumat halishka. Other monies of the temple is called bedek habayit. Bedek habayit was meant for building and maintenance, basically. That was given by donations of people. So we're going to have a few debates about things. Were they given from the trumat halishka or were they given from the bedek habayit? And we'll talk about some other things as we go on. So now we're going to have a list, and just notice, it's interesting, but we're not going to delve into it. Each thing is said by a different rabbi. Okay, we're going to have a lot of statements by rabbis. This was paid from the trumat halishka. A different one says this was paid. I don't think they disagree with each other. I think each one is just adding another item that was paid for by the trumat halishka. I'll remind you of a few other things about the trumat halishka. We learned about it in Masechet Shkalim, because that's all about the machatzira shekel. There were 3 kupot. They were Aleph, Bet, Gimel, if you remember. And then what they would do is they would collect it until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they would take a big amount from what was collected, and they would say, okay, this is about the amount we need for the sacrifices. They would then take that money out. That's called tormim et halishka. Then there was some money left. What was left, we're going to see later in today's daf, is called the shayarei trumat halishka or shayarei halishka. That's whatever they didn't take out at that time, called the shiraim. Then with the money, they're going to buy things. And whatever's left from what they buy for the animals, they buy all the animals for sacrifices. And then there's what's called motar. Whatever's left from there, we're going to see you buy other things with which. So it's confusing because both are remainders, but they're called by different names. There's the motar trumat halishka, which is the extra of what we already took out of the kupa, out of the box. And then there's what's left still in the box, and that's called the shiraim, okay? Or shayarei halishka. And each are going to be used for different things. So here goes our list. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Redifa says in the name of Rabbi Ami, Mevakrei mumin shebYerushalayim hayu notlim schara mitrumat halishka. So remember, they're meant for the animals and the sacrifices. So remember, for sacrifices, all sorts of things that relate to the sacrifices are also going to be spent from that money. So you need someone to check that the animals don't have blemishes. The animal has a blemish, can't go on the altar. So the people got their salary for checking the mumin from the trumat halishka. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Talmidei Chachamim hamelamdim hilchot shchita lekohanim hayu notlim schara mitrumat halishka. The salaries for the people who taught the kohanim how to slaughter the animals, they needed to know how to slaughter. That was their job. So, right, a lot of the slaughtering happened by the kohanim, even though Theoretically, Azar could do shchita, but usually the Kohanim did it. So whoever was the teacher, they would also get it from there because it's also related to the sacrifices. Amar of Gidal Amarav, Talmidei Chachamim hamalamdim hilchot kmitza lekohanim. Remember the kmitza, that's the 3 fingers, where the Kohen sticks his 3 middle fingers, and there's a whole science of how to do it, with brushing off with your other 2 fingers the stuff on the sides. That's what they would use for the mincha, the meal offerings. They would dip their fingers in. So again, somebody would need to teach the Kohanim how to do this. The fact that it's talked about that it was a very hard thing to do. And they would get their salary also, because that was the meal offerings. It also relates to the sacrifices. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan migihei sfarim shebi Yerushalayim. The ones who fixed the Sifrei Torah in Jerusalem, hayu notlim schara mitrumat halishka, also would get their money. This is a little bit more difficult. Whose books, whose Sefer Torah? Some people say it was people had their own personal Sifrei Torah in their houses, and it was important that they all be correct, and therefore they would also get paid by this. This is a little strange, not exactly relating to the sacrifices. Therefore, some people say we're talking about, I believe it's the Rashba who says that it's the ones that were owned by the Kohanim, so that the Kohanim wouldn't have an incorrect Sefer Torah with something that was written wrong, and then they would come to do the sacrifices wrong because their Sefer Torah was messed up. Next, Amar Rav Nachman Amarav, Nashim ha'orgot beparochot, the women who weaved, embroidered the parochet, the curtains. So notlot schara mitrumat halishka, they would also get it from the trumat halishka. Now we're going to have a whole debate about this because Rav Nachman said this in the name of Rab, but he said, "Ani omer mikotche bedek habayit." I say, comes from the bedek habayit because it's part of the building. Curtains. Okay, now we're going to end up distinguishing between different types of curtains. So now he says the following: Ani omer mikotche bedek habayit ho'il parochot tachat binyan asuyot. They're in place of walls. There's different parochet. Talk about them now. There were parochet that went on the gates, okay, and they were basically to block people from seeing what was going on inside. The Kohanim didn't want people to be looking at them, or laws were that people weren't supposed to watch the Kohanim when they did the avoda, and therefore they put up all around these gates, around the Azara, and around the temple in general. There were all different gates. They had curtains on them. But there was a curtain on the way into the Heichal. There was, which is where the Shulchan and the Menorah. There was a curtain, if you remember from Yoma, there were 2 curtains on the way into the Kodesh Kodeshim. Now, if you remember, the Kohen goes in from one side and then goes in, then walks the other way, and then goes in, right? Each one had an entrance, one on the north, one on the south, and the Kohen would go and then walk in between the 2 parochot, and then from then go into the Kodesh Kodeshim. He didn't just walk straight in. It wasn't like a curtain go in. He would have to go around through the, okay, each one had the opening on the other side. Why were there 2 curtains there? And there was about an amma of distance in between them, because in the first temple, there used to be a wall. In the second temple, instead of the wall, they put curtains. So as Rav Nachman says, these curtains were in place of a wall. So they're basically part of the binyan. The other curtains that were in place of a wall were on the top of the Heichal. Above, there was a second floor, and also the Kodesh Kodeshim. That was all one structure. And again, in the first temple period, there was a ceiling. In the second temple period, they put a curtain. Okay, I don't know. Maybe they didn't walk in the second floor. I don't remember, but it must have been something else. Otherwise, I don't know how they stood. But it was a curtain basically that separated between the first floor and the second floor. So that was also in place of a binyan, okay, in place of a wall. So it comes from Nachman and says those parochet were in place of the binyan. They're building costs. They're not for the purposes of the avoda. So that's Rav Nachman. May today. Now we're going to bring a difficulty against Rav Nachman. Nashima orgot beparochet. The source, tannaitic source says, the women who weave the parochet, ubeit garmu al maselechem apanim, and beit avtinas al masak Torah. Those are the ones we just made mention of. Those were the 2 that ended up getting paid extra money because they tried to fire them because they wouldn't share their secrets with anyone, how to do the lechem apanim so that it wouldn't break, and how to do the masak Torah so the smoke would rise exactly the way it was supposed to rise. And where would they get paid from? So here it says clearly the women who weave the parochet also got their money from trumat halishka and not from the bedek habayit. To which the answer, hatam b'debave. We're going to distinguish between different types of parochet. Those were for the gates. The Amar Rabbi Zera Amarav, 13 parochet hayu b'mikdash sheni, shiv'a kedeged shiv'a sha'arim. Okay, there were more sha'arim. And we'll say, well, we're talking about the bigger ones. I'm not going to get into the details, but there were 7 gates. So 7 around the 7 gates. One for the entranceway to the Heichal, one for the entranceway to the Ulam, which is the area that led into the Heichal, which was opposite the altar. And Shtayim Badvil, that was 2 in between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kodeshim, and Shtayim Kinegdam Ba'aliyah, and 2 for the second floor. So now, the truth is maybe on the second floor, it's in between them upstairs. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not in place of the floor. Maybe it's just above, also in between the area above the Heichal and the area above the Kodesh Kodeshim. Maybe I misunderstood that. Okay. In any case, right now, what do we have? It's interesting because you would have thought that they would bring a source to describe the differences between them, but they don't. This source basically says these are the 13, and the answer is that the ones that basically are paid for by the bedek habayit are the 4 that are in the place of the binyan, the ones that are between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kodeshim. And the other ones that are for stopping people from looking at the kohanim while they do their avodah, while they do the sacrifices, that's a need of the sacrifices, and that's why it's paid from trumat halishka. So that's how they resolved that issue, according to Rav Nachman, who said that they were paid from bedek habayit. What he meant is those 4 were bedek habayit, but all the rest were paid from the trumat halishka. Tanu Rav Anan, another source about who got paid from the trumat halishka. Nashim hamigadlot b'nehen lepara. You might remember this. I'm not going to get into all the details, but if you remember, they would have these children live in a separate area where they protected them from not having any contact with their bodies at all, and they would be the ones that would carry the para aduma stuff. I think it was they would carry the ashes, right, and the water, right. They were the ones who got the water out, and basically they were living in this very close, protected area. And their mothers were basically bringing them up and disconnected from, they couldn't go work. So they would get their sachar b'trumat halishka. Abba Shaul Omer, he disagrees, because that's also tzorach the korbanot, to have this way to purify people. Abba Shaul says, no, nashim yikarot she'b'Yerushalayim, and a bunch of times in the Gemara it talks about these, and yikirei Yerushalayim, it came up dafka and Yom Kippur. They would be, I think they were the ones who read the parts in the Torah to the Kohen Gadol the night before. They kept him up, I think. In any case, the Nashimi Karot Yerushalayim, maybe they're related to the Anashimi Kirim. It's not so clear. Are they wealthy? Are they prominent? What does it mean? But they would be Zanot Otanim Aprenasot Otam. It makes more sense in this case. They were wealthy. They had extra money. So they were the ones who supported these women who were making sure their sons would not come in contact with impurity in order to do the paraduma. Now, until now, we've had a whole list of different people that get their salary from the trumat halishka. We have one debate about the women who weave the parochet, and then we kind of, either you go with Rav, who says all of it was trumat halishka, or you have Rav Nachman, who splits it depending on which one. Ba'amine Rav Huna Merav. Now Rav Huna asked Rav the following question. Klei sharet. There were all these. It was known that there were 93 of them. All sorts of utensils, bowls, spoons, pans that were used in the temple, basically for the purposes of the sacrifices. So now he's going to ask, do we pay from the money used for maintenance and upkeep? Is it sorech mizbeach ninu? Is it serving the altar, because we use them on the altar, and therefore it's kind of serving the altar, and the altar is in the ground, basically. It's attached to the ground. It's considered binyan. So it would sound like it's a building cost. And therefore it would come from the maintenance and building money. Or are they needed for the sacrifices, right? You need all the utensils in order to do all the different actions of the sacrifices. For example, collect the blood and all of that, to collect the ketoret, the incense, to offer it up, etc. So Amar le ein asin ela mitrumat halishka. He says they're from the trumat halishka because they're really for the purposes of the sacrifices. Eitive, Rav Huna questions him and says, wait a minute. Urkechalotam, it says, now Eitive usually means we're going to bring a tannaitic source to knock out an Amora, but in this case, he's going to bring a pasuk from Sefer Divrei Yamim, from Chronicles. In Chronicles and in Sefer Malachim, and we're going to see the contradiction between the pasukim. There's a discussion about, by the way, the study guide for today. I put up a study guide that starts from this part, from this question of Rav. There was a big, they decided we're going to fix up the temple in the times of Yehoash, the king, And Yehoyada was the Kohen in charge at the time. Ukechalotam, when they finished, so they collected all this money, which you would call bedek habayit, because they were trying to do upkeep of the temple. They brought lifnei hamelech v'Yehoyada, before the king and Yehoyada, et shal hakesef, the rest of the money. This is going to be our important pasuk, which sounds like the money they collected for the bedek habayit, because that was what they had collected money for. And they used the extra money to make new utensils, the gomel, etc. So Rav Huna says, sounds like they paid for the treasury with the bedek habayit money, with the maintenance money, not with the trumat halishka money, not with the shekel money. Amalei da krayach tuve lo krayach navi. Whoever taught you Ketuvim didn't teach you Navi, because that's very nice. It says that in Chronicles, which is part of the Ketuvim, the writings. But what about in the prophets? Look at the pasuk in the prophets. Don't make from here the utensils. In the middle there, they talk about all the money we collected. That money is going to the people who worked, who did all the work. It's not going for the utensils. So it seems clear it's not going for the utensils. So that's what Rav answers. He says, don't quote me the pasuk in Divrei Yamim. I'll quote you the pasuk in Melachim, which says they didn't use the money for the utensils, because they needed it to pay the people's salaries. Ihachi, to which the Gemara says, well, it's very nice that Rav uses the pasuk in Melachim and ignores the pasuk in Divrei Yamim, but it's really not very nice because Ihachi kashu krayadade. These psukim contradict each other. How's Rav going to resolve that contradiction between the psukim? Lo kashya, kan shegavu v'hotiru, kan shegavu v'lo hotiru. In the pasuk in Chronicles, where it said they used the extra money, that's when they collected the money and then they had extra. In other words, generally, you're not going to use the money from the bedek habayit, from the maintenance money and the building money for the utensils. But if it's left over, as it was there, sha'ar hakesef, the leftover money, then you could use it. But if you collected and there was no money left, that's the pasuk in Malachim, which said, this money needs to go to pay people, and therefore you can't use it for the klei sharet. But if you have money left after you paid everybody, then you could use it for klei sharet. To which the Gemara says, how does that help you? Understand, people gave it for a specific purpose, right? When you designate your tzedakah money, they can't just say, oh, there's leftover money, we're giving it somewhere else. Or maybe they can. It's a good question. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Aval, leiv beiti matneh alehem. The court, interesting, they said the heart of the court, it doesn't really mean the heart, it means the court itself made a stipulation. If you need it, then, in other words, when they collected the money for the bedek habayit, they basically told people, we're collecting money for upkeep, but if there's anything left over, we're going to use it for the klei sharet. And then it was already stipulated from the beginning. Whether they stipulated or not, it's not clear. But the Beit Din has the power to do this. We've been talking a lot lately about the Beit Din and the power of the Beit Din. And the Beit Din, we say hefker Beit Din, hefker. The Beit Din can actually designate monies for other purposes. So theoretically, what they're saying is, when the Beit Din collected it in the beginning, it was clear that they're collecting it for this purpose. But there's always, often when you collect money for something, there's extra, and the extra was going to go to the klei sharet. Okay, so that resolved the issue. But generally, again, we're going to stick with what Rav says, it seems, that the klei sharet were paid for by the trumat halishka. Yes, if there's extra money from the bedek habayit, we could use it for that. Okay. Tana debate, even though Rav Huna seemed to disagree. He seemed to say, no, really, it sounds like it's from the bedek habayit, from the pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Tana debate Rabbi Yishmael. Now we're going to bring a braita. That's Rabbi Yishmael that's going to prove Rav. Klei sharet ba'im mitrumat halishka. Says it explicitly, like Rav said. Shenemar. And he's going to learn it from the pasuk. Et shal ha-kesef, the remainder of the money. Now, eze kesef sheyesh bo shirayim. If you remember, I told you before, and this is why I told you before, the trumat halishka, when you gave them a chatzira shekel, there were leftovers. Why were there leftovers? Because 3 times a year they would be tormim et halishka. They would take out whatever money they thought they needed. Anything left there was called the shirayim, the remainder. You don't have that with the bedek habayit. The bedek habayit is a kuppah that's constantly being filled up and being used, and there's nothing called the remainder. So because it says shal hakesef, it sounds like money that has a remainder. And therefore, ezu kesef sheyesh bo shirayim, what money has a remainder? And therefore we see that the shara kesef is not what we thought originally, which is Rav Huna thought The shar kesef is whatever money they collected for the upkeep and the building of the temple. No, the shar kesef is a clear reference to the trumat halishka, according to this. The ema shirayin gufayu, but wait a minute. If it says they took the shar hakesef and they used it to make the klei sharet, it sounds like they took the remainder, right? There's different rules. If you remember from Masechet Shkalim, and we're going to see some now going forward, there's different rules for what you can use the money for and what you could use the remainder of the money for. Now we're talking about taking it from the money itself that was taken out of the kuppah, which we call the trumat halishka, that we were trumat halishka, if you remember, right? So that's when we take out all the money, we use it to buy the sacrifices, and then we use it for all these other things, the salaries of this, the women who weave, the salaries of the people checking the mawin, and for the klei sharet. But according to this, it sounds like the she'er kesef, the remainder, meaning what was still left in the kuppah at the time after they took out the money. That would sound like what you should be using. To which they say, no, Raba, we're going to learn it from this drasha of Rava, ha'olah, where it talks about the beginning of Sefer it's actually chapter 6 of Sefer Vayikra. It's talking about the korban olah, and it calls it ha'olah, the burnt offering. Why the he'ayidiyah, the burnt offering? There's many burnt offerings, to which they say olah rishona. Ha'olah means the first olah. It means the first sacrifice of the day, which is the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice. So ha'chanami ha'kesef kesef rishon. When it says she'er ha'kesef, what it means to tell you is it's money that has she'er, it has a remainder, but ha'kesef comes to tell you we take it from the first money, meaning the money that came out of the kuppah, not the money that was left. So it actually comes from the trumat halishka, even though it sounded like maybe it came from the remainder. Meitive. And now we have a difficulty with Rav. Okay, so we keep going back to Rav. That's why I made a sheet to kind of see where we're up to. Rav Huna brought a difficulty on Rav from the pasuk in Chronicles. Then we resolved that. Then we brought a support for Rav from the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael and the Shar HaKesef. And now we're bringing a question on Rav. Haktoret v'kol korbanot tzibur. This is going to have a whole list of all sorts of things and where we pay them from. The incense, all the communal offerings, all ba'im trumat halishka. That's what the trumat halishka money is used for. Mizbach hazahav ulivona ukli sharet ba'im motar nesachim. The money for the golden altar and the frankincense on it and the klei sharet. That's what we've been talking about all along. Ba'im motar nesachim. People collected money for the wine libations. They would pour wine into the altar. Whatever's left from that money, this really sounds like Masechet Shkalim. We've learned, we saw this, things like this in Masechet Shkalim. All the motar this, the motar that, what we use it for. That is where we buy the klei sharet from. So now you see, it doesn't come from the trumat halishka. It comes from the remainder of the money collected for the libations. Mizbach ha'olah, we're just continuing with the source. The Mizbach ha'olah, right, the one where the golden altar is the one inside the heichal. The other one is the big one outside where all the sacrifices were brought on. The gold one is where the incense was burnt on. Halishakot v'azarot ba'imi kochei bedek habayit. All those things, the Mizbach ha'olah was considered part of the ground because it was attached to the ground and it was big and it was made of stone. And all the other, right, like the building parts of the lishakot, all the chambers and the azara, that, and the Ezra Nashim, and there's the Ezra Israel, and the Ezra Kohanim, all those spaces all the things there were from Kochei Bedek Habayit. Chutz lechomat azara, everything outside the walls of the azara, ba'imi shayarei halishakot. Okay, everything left from the shayarei halishka, that's the shayarei trumat halishka. Whatever was left in the kuppah that we didn't take out for the sacrifices, that's what we deal with, things that are outside the main azara area. Sorry, I said before the azarot included the Ezra Nashim. I think it doesn't. I think this is Chutz l'chomat azara would be the Ezra Nashim. I'm not sure exactly. You could check it. Zoe Shashaninu, and this is what we say, Chomat ha'ir u'migdolotev v'chol tzorchei ha'ir. Not only that, the walls of the city, the tall towers in the city, and any needs of the city of Jerusalem, ba'im misharei halishka. That's what we would use the extra for. So now we're stuck with this problem that this Braita says the motar nisachim were used for the shayarei, were used for the klei sharet. Rav said the klei sharet were from the trumat halishka. So how do we resolve it? To which they say, tannaitic. In the end, this is actually a tannaitic debate. And we're going to see a number of opinions. I charted it out on the sheets. You can look at it to get a good sense of it all. And here, because there's a lot of different topics here, what we use different remainders of different monies for. Motar truma mahi osim ba. That's what we're talking about, right? The extras. Once we took the money out of to buy the sacrifices, what's left of it? What are we going to use it for? Tanakama says, Riku ezahav tzipoi lebeit kodshei hakodashim. They would put gold, like thin gold. They would basically, the room, we put around the walls and the floors, these gold, it was all gold plated in the Kodesh Kodashim. It's very beautiful and grand. That's what we use the motar truma for, according to Tanakama. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, motar perot, the remainder of the fruits, we don't know what fruits we're talking about yet. The Gemara is going to get to that. Leketz hamizbeach. You might remember ketz hamizbeach. We had it at Shtalim. We've seen it other times as well. Ketz hamizbeach is they always wanted sacrifices to be going on the altar. So when they finished with the daily offerings and whatever voluntary offerings people had, if there was nothing happening on the altar, they would take money from, according to this, from the motar perot would go to the ketz hamizbeach to have korbanot olah, burnt offerings just going on the altar at all times. Motar truma, what was left from the truma, goes to the klei sharei. This is Rabbi Yishmael, which fits with the tannaitic Rabbi Yishmael that we saw before, which fits with Rav, that it went to the klei sharei. Rabbi Akiva Omer, motar truma leketz hamizbeach. The extra from the trumat halishka would go to the ketz hamizbeach for these extra sacrifices. Motar nisachim leklei sharei. That's the other opinion that we saw in the Braita, that the motar nisachim was what was used. Everything left from the libations that was used to pay for the klei sharei. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Omer. Okay, we have 4 different rabbis here. Motar nisachim leketz hamizbeach. Now the extra libations went leketz hamizbeach. Motar truma leklei sharei. He agrees with Rabbi Yishmael about the motar truma, about the klei sharei. Klei sharei were paid for by the motar truma. Again, truma doesn't mean truma of kohanim; it means the trumat halishka, which is what we've been talking about, the half shekel. And then zeh v'zeh lo hayu modim beperot, and neither of them agreed about the perot issue. Okay, what's the perot issue? Remember, Rabbi Yishmael said the motar perot went leketz hamizbeach. They don't think so. We're going to have to explain what this means. Perot mahi. So what is this perot? So basically, we're done with our sugya, which is this question that Rav Anan asked Rav about klei sharei. What are they? Where does it come from? Rav said from the trumat halishka. We then have Rav Anan who disagreed with him and said, no, I think it's bedek habayit from this verse. We now see that there was actually a debate, although it wasn't the same debate. It was, is it from the trumat halishka or is it from the motar nisachim? Okay, from the extra money left over from the libations. But now we have to end with understanding what's this perot issue. Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, motar truma ma'ayu osim ba, the extra truma, the money that was left after we bought all the sacrifices, what would they do with whatever's left? And after they paid all the salaries and after they, if it's the klei sharei, what would they do with it? Lokchim perot bizol, mochrim otam biyoker. Basically, invest it. Buy cheap fruits, produce, and sell it for a higher price. Basically, invest the money. And whatever they made would go for extra sacrifices on the altar. That's motar perot that Rabbi Yishmael said, go leketz hamizbeach. And that's what I just said, motar perot leketz hamizbeach. So now, why didn't they agree about this? It's a smart idea. Invest the money. Ditnan, as it says in the following Mishnah, Masechet Shkalim, motar sharei halishka ma'ayu osim bahen, right? Sharei halishka is the same as motar truma. It's what's left in the trumat halishka. They just keep calling it by different names, just to confuse you. Lokchim bahen yenot shmanim uslatot. They would buy wine, oil, solet, right? That was fine flour. V'hasachar lehekdesh, and whatever they would make off of it would go to hekdesh. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva Omer, ein mistaklim b'shal hekdesh. You don't make money off of hekdesh. The af lo b'shel aniyim, and not poor people anyway. So an incredibly relevant Gemara, incredibly relevant machloket. B'shel hekdesh, my time alo. Why not hekdesh? Okay, we don't have hekdesh anymore, but we do have charity. Ein aniyupim kol shiur. It's not an appropriate way in the temple. Everything is dealt with in a sense of wealth, like wealthy people. The temple was a place to be respected. Okay, this always stands in contradiction to Hatorah chasal mamonan shel Yisrael, okay, that we don't want people to spend too much money, right? On the one hand, the Kodesh Kodashim was made of gold, right? They spent a lot of money. On the other hand, there's also, you don't want to spend too much money because we don't want to waste all the people's money on this. So there's always this issue in the temple. But on the other hand, there's this issue of wanting things to look grand. To take and invest, it's very interesting they say this. You would think rich people invest, poor people don't invest. They say, no. Doing that is like a poor people's thing because they want to make money, so they're going to buy cheap things and sell them back for more money. But we don't do that in the temple. That's not respectful with temple money. It's a very interesting answer. Poor people, you can't invest their money that was collected for charity for poor people. You can't invest because when you invest things, you don't have easy access to the money. Maybe some poor person will come along and need the money and you won't have money to give them. So it's a very interesting question. Are you allowed to invest? This comes from the Seder. Are you allowed to invest tzedakah money? You have a charity that you manage. Are you allowed to invest the money? Right? First of all, they don't discuss. Maybe you'll fail also. We all know investments could fail. And are you allowed to do that with charity money? This would seem to indicate also you can't because you won't have the money accessible. You might need it. So first of all, if you have enough money fluid, you could say, I can keep enough money fluid and I can invest some other money. Maybe that would then be allowed as long as you don't have to worry about that somebody might come and you won't have the money to give them. Anyway, interesting questions that come up from here. And the whole concept also of the temple has to be a place of respect and wealth and treat it like wealth, or like a wealthy person would. It's also a question, right? On the other hand, the temple is, you have to deal with, you don't want to spend too much money on the temple. So there's always that conflict. We'll end with this for today, food for thought, and have a great day, everybody. And remember to register for the Shiur.